Let's get one thing straight. Medieval castles weren't cozy, romantic fortresses filled with roaring fireplaces and warm feather beds. They were stone refrigerators, colder inside than the winter air itself. Imagine stepping into a room so icy that your breath turns to mist the moment it leaves your lungs, and the walls sweat with condensation because the stones never, ever warm up. These places weren't designed for comfort. They were designed for war. And yet people slept in them every night for centuries. And here's the wild part. The biggest danger inside a medieval castle wasn't always invaders, it was the cold. Later in this video, we'll uncover the extreme method even kings used to survive the coldest nights, something almost no one talks about today. But first, we need to understand just how unrelentingly brutal sleeping in a castle really was. When we picture medieval sleep, we imagine grand chambers lit by flickering torchlight, tapestries fluttering gently in the warm glow of the hearth. But the reality, it was more like lying down in a damp, freezing cave that just happened to have a bed in it. Stone walls absorbed cold like sponges. And castle walls weren't thin, they were 3 to 6 feet of dense medieval masonry that trapped winter air so effectively that many rooms settled at temperatures barely above freezing. And since windows were glassless for most of the Middle Ages, cold wind blew straight into the chambers, carrying with it the sharp sting of winter and a constant howl that made sleep sound like a battle against nature itself. People didn't just endure discomfort, they endured danger. Cold was deadly, and every winter, castle inhabitants braced for the same grim reality. The castle itself became their enemy. A medieval castle was first and foremost a fortress. Every part of its design, from the massive walls to the spiral staircases, prioritized defense over comfort.
Warmth, a distant afterthought.
The stones drew moisture from the ground, filling rooms with an ever-present dampness that sunk deep into bones. Floors were so cold that touching them barefoot felt like stepping onto ice. Drafts blew through the smallest cracks with the strength of miniature windstorms, extinguishing candles and sending shivers through even the thickest cloaks. And then there were the night guards, perhaps the most miserable souls in any castle. Their job was to patrol the battlements at the very moment the wind was strongest, right after midnight. Some accounts describe castle walls so cold that guards had to stamp their feet every few seconds just to avoid frostbite. Imagine pacing a stone walkway in total darkness, the freezing wind clawing at your cloak, knowing sunrise was still hours away. If the guards survived the night, they were lucky. But inside the keep, people faced a different nightmare, the challenge of actually getting warm enough to fall asleep. Medieval beds weren't just for comfort, they were acts of survival. To escape the icy floors, beds were raised high off the ground, sometimes several feet, because cold air settles low. Early mattresses were stuffed with straw, feathers if you were wealthy, but more often wool, which trapped heat better than anything else available. And here's something you may not know. Most people did not sleep alone. The poor slept together for warmth, servants shared beds, children bundled together, entire families crammed into a single sleeping space like human furnaces, each body fighting off the cold for the others. Even the rich slept with layers of protection, wool underclothes, thick nightcaps, fur-lined blankets, cloaks folded and draped like armor. And yet, despite all this, noble complaints still appear in medieval letters.
My chamber is so cold that no fire can warm it.
This wasn't exaggeration, fires helped, but they weren't the miracle solution we imagine. Lighting a fire in a medieval castle was a delicate negotiation with physics, smoke, and luck. Hearths were enormous, wide enough for several people to stand inside, but they were shockingly inefficient. Warm air escaped up chimneys at alarming rates, and in many rooms the smoke refused to leave at all. Instead, it filled the chamber like a fog bank. Imagine lying down to sleep in a room where the air itself burns your eyes and throat, where every breath tastes like charred wood and soot. Fires could warm you, yes, but they could also kill you. Carbon monoxide poisoning was a silent, invisible threat. That's why many people didn't heat their rooms at night at all. They relied instead on braziers, small portable bowls of burning charcoal. But these came with their own horror. Braziers were responsible for countless castle fires, burning entire chambers to ash while the occupants slept. Which leads us to one of the most fascinating survival rituals of medieval castle life. Before bed, castle inhabitants performed a series of rituals that we would recognize today as survival techniques. First, the warming pan, a metal container filled with hot coals, slid between layers of bedding to warm them before sleep. The pan was pulled out quickly so the bed wouldn't catch fire, but the lingering heat brought precious comfort. Then came layers, layers upon layers. People went to bed fully clothed, woolen socks, long underwear, heavy tunics, fur-lined nightcaps, cloaks pulled tightly around the shoulders. Even the mattress was layered, straw for insulation, wool for warmth, fur for luxury. Walls were covered in tapestries, not for decoration, but to act as insulation. These thick, woven fabrics trapped air and kept the cold stone from radiating into the room. In wealthier castles, people slept in bed boxes, enclosed wooden frames with doors, forming a miniature warm enclosure like a medieval sleeping pod. Inside, candles could safely warm the air, and body heat had no place to escape. But not everyone had the luxury of privacy in insulated chambers. The castle elite often slept in special rooms designed to capture warmth. These were called solas, upper floor chambers that received the most sunlight and stayed warmest during the day. Some rare advanced castles even borrowed an ancient Roman innovation, the hypocaust, a heated floor system. Hot air flowed beneath the stone slabs, warming the rooms above. These were astonishingly effective, but incredibly expensive to build and maintain. For everyone else, the servants, guards, cooks, stable workers, the story was very different. Servants' quarters were often near the outer walls, where the cold was most relentless. Some slept in hallways, others near the kitchen for warmth. Many simply wrapped themselves in cloaks and prayed the night would be short. And then there were the winter emergencies. Nights when temperatures dropped so low that even nobles fled their chambers. This brings us to the final, shocking technique medieval people used to survive the coldest nights. So what did people do when even fires, furs, and layers couldn't fight the cold? They slept in the Great Hall, the largest, warmest room in the castle. During winter storms, entire households, nobles included, dragged their bedding to the hall and slept near the big, central hearth. Servants, nobles, children, guards, everyone gathered together in a massive communal sleep just to survive the cold. The Great Hall became a human beehive of warmth. Fires roared, people huddled. The stone castle breathed a sigh of relief, if only for a moment. This wasn't an everyday practice. This was emergency survival, and it worked. When you strip away the romance of medieval castles, the banners, the armor, the torches, you're left with something stark and humbling. Humans lived inside frozen stone fortresses and survived anyway. They endured nights that would break most of us. They built routines, invented solutions, and adapted with a stubbornness that defies the imagination. They didn't thrive because castles were comfortable. They thrived because humans adapt, because survival isn't about comfort. It's about persistence, one freezing night at a time. They slept through winters that would send us running for central heating. They kept families alive in rooms where frost formed on the inside of the walls. They collected warmth wherever they could find it, in fire, in furs, in togetherness, in sheer willpower. And in doing so, they turned stone iceboxes into homes. But to truly understand medieval resilience, we need to step even closer into their world, closer to the small, intimate moments that never make it into textbooks. Because survival was not just a matter of architecture or woolen layers. It was a matter of ritual, community, and sheer human stubbornness. Consider, for example, a scene recorded in a 14th century household account from Northumberland. a castle steward writes about waking before dawn during a brutal winter storm to prepare the great hall for the household. He describes the cold as a living creature, creeping along the floor and nipping at his ankles through his boots. He notes how the servants lit candles, not for light, but because the tiny flames brought psychological comfort. The idea of warmth, even if the air around them stayed icy. This is the part of medieval life we rarely think about. Not the battles, not the politics, but the quiet, invisible negotiations people made with an unforgiving world. And cold was the most relentless negotiator of all. There's a small, almost throwaway mention in a 15th century letter from a noblewoman who complains about her girl Margaret, a teenage servant whose job was to sleep directly in front of the kitchen hearth, so she could wake early and rekindle the coals before the household rose. Margaret's bed was not a bed at all. It was a bundle of wool blankets laid on the floor near the warmest spot in the entire castle. It sounds comfortable, maybe even cozy, until you realize the price. Soot settled into her hair and lungs. Sparks sometimes burned small holes in her bedding. If the fire went out, the floor beneath her became freezing stone within minutes. Yet Margaret's nightly vigil was essential. Because if the morning fires weren't blazing by dawn, the entire castle would suffer. Her story is a reminder that warmth inside a castle wasn't automatic. It was earned, often by the people whose names history forgets. High status didn't guarantee warmth. Take the case of John of Lancaster, brother to King Henry V. In his letters, he repeatedly complains about the deadly chill of Kenilworth Castle. One entry describes how winter winds forced him to abandon his private chamber entirely. The curtains do shake like the sails of a ship, and no fire will hold against the night wind. Think about that visual. A noble's bed surrounded by heavy embroidered curtains meant to trap heat, billowing like a ship's canvas in a storm. Not even wealth could silence the winter. So John did what countless nobles did. He retreated to rooms deeper inside the castle, closer to servants, chambers, and kitchens. Places where body heat and daily activity softened the air. It's a strange twist of medieval life that the poorest rooms were often the warmest, simply because more people lived in them. Children, of course, adapted differently. A 13th century French chronicler notes that castle children made a winter game of racing the cold. At night, they would stand at the edge of the great hall, take a breath, and dash toward their beds to see if they could slip under the blankets before their toes began to sting. It sounds playful, almost cute. But underneath the humor is something else. A child's attempt to turn a harsh environment into something survivable. Their laughter didn't warm the room, but it warmed the experience. Even in stone iceboxes, humans found ways to create warmth that had nothing to do with fire. If anyone knew cold intimately, it was the night guards, the men stationed on parapets where stone wind tunnels magnified every freezing gust. One account from a Scottish castle tells of a guard who survived a night so cold that ice formed on his beard faster than he could scrape it away. He reportedly stuffed wool into his mouth, not to warm himself, but to keep his teeth from chattering loudly enough to be heard by enemy scouts. Imagine that. A man standing alone on a wall of black stone, holding his jaw shut with a fistful of wool to stop the sound of his own survival from betraying the castle. These were the kinds of nights that forged medieval endurance. Cold didn't just make sleep difficult, it shaped medieval life at every level. It affected marriages. Newlyweds often slept with extended family in winter for warmth. It shaped architecture. Spiral staircases always turned clockwise, so right-handed defenders could swing swords. But also so heat from lower floors wouldn't escape upward too quickly. It influenced fashion. Nightcaps weren't just cute medieval attire. They protected ears from frostbite indoors. It dictated daily schedules. People went to bed early because the night hours were the most brutal. It created rituals. Families prayed each night, not just for safety, but for warmth. And through all of this, medieval people endured with a kind of quiet heroism we rarely acknowledge. Their world demanded it. This final story captures the medieval winter better than any record or textbook ever could. During a particularly harsh freeze in the early 1400s, King Charles VI of France refused to sleep in his royal chamber. The cold inside the room was so intense, so penetrating, that even with Braziers, furs and tapestries, his breath crystallized on the inside of the bed curtains. So the King of France, the most powerful man in the roomiest castle in the kingdom, descended from his private quarters and slept in the great hall with dozens of servants, guards, and attendants. Huddled together like travelers in a storm, the king, the servants, the guards, all united not by rank, but by the cold. And in that moment, medieval life reveals its truth. Inside a stone castle in the dead of winter, everyone was equal before the frost. Torchlight, feasts, banners fluttering dramatically in the wind. But those are the daytime illusions. Night revealed the truth. Castles were beautiful prisons carved from ice, places where people fought not just enemies but nature itself, where warmth became a treasure, fire became salvation, and night became a test of will. And yet, they endured, they adapted. They whispered stories into the darkness. They built rituals, shared beds, shared fears, shared hope. They transformed cold stone into something human. Because that's what people do. We survive the unspeakable. We reshape the environment that tries to break us. And we find warmth, not just in fire, but in each other. The next time you walk into a heated room on a winter day, remember this. A medieval castle would have killed for that warmth. And the people who lived inside them? They survived nights that would challenge even our strongest hearts. Not because they were comfortable, but because they refused to let the cold win.